Hey everyone, how's it going? Today is June 2nd, 2023. Another really bullish day and week in the markets. Almost no reason to be bearish on anything seemingly, but when everything looks too hunky-dory, that's when it's good to take a step back and maybe think a little bit contrarian about things. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be doing a bit of a contrarian look at what is going on in the world of markets. Last week, as you might remember, or 2 weeks ago, I talked about how not only are things like Nvidia hitting all-time highs, and now it's like Apple and Microsoft, and the stock market's at the highest levels in the U.S. that it's been in weeks, or months and years almost, I guess. But now it is India, it is Germany, it is a bunch of other countries around the world also continuing to all-time highs. The one topic we haven't talked about so much is China. Where does China sit in all of this? And today we're going to be covering a crisis that is brewing in China with youth unemployment. And we're going to dive into that, how I think it has this kind of interesting connection to Bitcoin, and a bunch of other really interesting stories that you might have missed this week. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Please give the video a like. It helps it reach more people. And without further ado, let's dive into the news. So first things first, before we get into everything to do with this crazy bullish market we have, let's take a look at what happened this week generally. So the tech index ended up closing really strong, again near the highs, led by things like Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, the usual suspects, right? What I was saying last week is that this is fine. You have like 7-8 stocks that are driving almost all the performance in the indexes, but in order to meaningfully go higher and to meaningfully return back to all-time highs across the indexes, we have to see some other things participate. And what we saw this week was not only some of the laggards participating, the things like in Arcade, the innovation names like Square, and some of these smaller mid-sized tech companies kind of also having a strong week, but we saw things like banks, we saw things like retail stocks, and some of these just, American bellwether companies, McDonald's, Chipotle, you name it, also joining the fray and continuing to hit higher highs as well. And so you're seeing a little bit of rotation, but you're also seeing the captains of the ship keep their strength up. Secondly, one of the more interesting developments is the total collapse of the volatility index this week. So gone are the days of the banking crisis. We had this spike up to 30 on the VIX, and now with the markets full steam ahead, full bullishness, nothing to be afraid of, debt ceiling stuff taken care of. I don't even need to mention it on the show. We are seeing VIX at the lowest levels, the volatility index at the lowest levels since almost pre-pandemic. So the market is telling you there is nothing to worry about. We're going to let the robots hit the buy button and number go up, stocks go up forever. Question is when is Bitcoin going to join in? I'm not going to do technical analysis on that, but the markets are telling you that I guess the best place to be right now is U.S. equities, more than U.S. bonds, more than just holding cash on the sidelines. It's U.S. equities. It's these high cash flowing companies. The less debt they have, the better. Buy those and you're good to go. Is that going to be like that forever? I don't know. But right now, that is the season of the day. And knowing that not usually a lot of crazy stuff happens in the summer in the stock market, I would expect these things to just grind meaningfully higher, maybe after a little consolidation, as it's been pretty crazy. But let's stop talking about all of the crazy market stuff, because I imagine there are people who have been sidelined from all this. I'm curious if you didn't end up buying the dip or anything like that. I definitely have missed a lot of this move. It caught me off guard. I thought, banking failures, maybe I should stay away from all equities. Clearly not the right move here, but nevertheless, you carry on. The thing that has been kind of interesting to me is trying to figure out, so where is the weakness? I think it's pretty obvious where the strength of the market is coming from. I think there are not really bad catalysts that are really on the horizon for us to look forward to. I do think the regional banking thing will turn into something a little bit bigger, but that could possibly not really catalyze until the fall. What's going on in China? I haven't heard a big headline out of there. We know that in the end of 2022, they kind of released and lowered the floodgates on all the pandemic restrictions, and the economy reopened to the world. And so what has been the result of that, and kind of where do we stand with China? Digging into that, I found out that right now they're going through a pretty massive youth unemployment crisis, and we'll dive into what exactly that curtails here. So this is a great article from the New York Times. China's young people can't find jobs, and Xi Jinping says to eat bitterness. So what essentially you have in China is something a little similar to what I think is happening in the US slowly. In the US, we had this wave of layoffs, middle managers, all these kind of unessentials laid off as companies kind of tightened up. And now these people who went to school for business or graphic design, or I guess some of these higher level professions, are not really able to find jobs in their marketplace. And if you think it's bad in the US, it's 10 times as bad in China, because not only do those jobs exist there, they don't pay nearly as well. And because their economy is not flourishing and ripping to new all-time highs like the US is, people who have these, what you would normally call mid-range job talents, higher level white-collar jobs or blue-collar jobs, I always mix it up. White-collar is the university degrees, blue-collar is like trucking, I believe. I don't want to mess this up on air, that's embarrassing. But those essential white-collar jobs that China had really been growing at a clip are not really showing up for younger people as the pandemic restrictions kind of end. And there was this big idea that China's reopening was going to be this big grand thing, and it just hasn't quite materialized. And so in response to this, Xi Jinping, the president of China, has basically said, there's a great quote here. China's young people are facing record high unemployment, and I believe the rate is about 19%, or 10% or something like that. It's very high for young people. It's between 10 to 20% of young people 18 to, let's just say, 30 are not finding any jobs in China, and they're living in these big cities. So China's young people are facing record high unemployment as the country's recovery from the pandemic is fluttering. They're struggling professionally and emotionally, and yet the Communist Party and the country's top leader, Xi Jinping, are telling them to stop thinking they are above doing manual work or moving to the countryside. They should learn to eat bitterness, Mr. Xi instructed, using a colloquial expression that means to endure hardships. So many young Chinese aren't buying it. They argue that they studied hard to get a college or graduate school degree only to find a shrinking job market, falling pay scale, and longer work hours. And now the government is telling them to put up with their hardships. And so they interviewed a young woman here. But essentially, this whole article covers a whole bunch of younger people in China who are just finding a lack of opportunities. They had gone to school, gotten prestigious degrees and higher level things, masters, PhDs, and they're not finding the jobs and the pay that they think that they deserve after all of this. And so it's kind of a worrisome precedent for China at large, because something sort of similar, this kind of contempt for, let's just call it the laziness of young people, happened prior to the Cultural Revolution under Chairman Mao in China as well. So during Mao Zedong's rule, about 16 million youth were taken essentially from the cities and moved to work in the fields and the plantations. And so after the Cultural Revolution, the young people came back into the cities and basically forced the Communist Party to pivot and to embrace things like self-employment and entrepreneurialism. And that is essentially when China's markets opened. It was a big young people's revolution that kind of kickstarted where China is today, which is kind of more open markets than they had previously ever been in history. And so Xi, on top of this, the current president, has also been guiding younger people over the last few years, actually, to move college graduates to more rural areas. China is infamous, and most of its population does live in these mega cities across the country. But the problem is Xi Jinping, he grew up as a soldier. He worked in the fields. He did a lot of tough manual labor. And so he doesn't maybe have, I guess, the empathy for China's youth, which are now much more in the technology class, the intellectual class, that are above doing manual labor. What makes it quite different in China is that it's a very hierarchical society there. So, if you are a Chinese man and you're looking to suit a woman and so forth, what you do as your career is very important. And so having all these young people without jobs or prospects and not really sure of where they're going in life is really not conducive to a constructive society and economy at large. And it's kind of weird seeing the predicament that they're in, considering that China, of almost all countries except for the US, has invested the most into things like nuclear energy so that they can have these massive technological advancements. They've invested so much into automation in their factories as well. Another great excerpt in this article, let me just find it here, is Here we go. Of the 13 Chinese graduates from a top UK university, the 5 who chose to stay in the West have all found jobs in Silicon Valley or Wall Street firms, but only 3 of the 8 that have returned to China have secured jobs. And so many people that even went to study abroad who have come back to China are now coming back to essentially no jobs. And so all of this, it seems like maybe it could just be a thing that you could just stimulate away into the economy. It might not seem such a big issue to you or me, especially because we probably don't live in China. But something to consider is sort of this idea that, has been percolating, that China is going to emerge as the big successor to the US, the reserve currency, the strongest economy. And they're not positioned really well for that role, especially now. We know, and this has been talked about quite a bit, that the demographics of China are really skewed. You have a lot of older people, and even though the one-child policy has been lifted in China, the birth rate has just been declining rapidly. And during the one-child policy in China, it was really enforced among families to have a lot of men. The male was going to be the one that carries the generation and the legacy title. It was a very, male-dominated society. It still is. And the result has been essentially that China has a massive surplus of men. There are almost, 11 men to every 10 women single in China. And, that might just seem like a little bit of a mismatch. That might just seem like something that sorts that out. But just think about this. Like, imagine that you are a male growing up in China. 1 in 10 of the men are not going to find a woman, not because of lack of trying, just because there isn't one. And China isn't a country that notoriously lets immigrants in to offset that. So your option, if you are, one of the unlucky 10 in China that can't find a mate, is essentially to leave. And so you have this impetus of, first of all, not enough jobs, not enough women in China if you're a man, and you also have the overwhelming kind of like statistical, knowledge that men are a lot more socially mobile than women. So men are going to be much more likely to emigrate out of the country, especially if they are alone. Women are not as likely to leave on kind of their own merits to seek things out like better opportunities. It's the men that are much more highly likely. And there's a great study here on this, actually. I was thinking about this. It made sense to me in practice, but I was wondering if there was a study. But yeah, overwhelmingly, in terms of finding careers, men are much more likely to leave their home. And that begs the question, I like to ask this too, because I'm just finding this more and more through my friend group. How, where you live right now, how far away is it from where you were born? Is it over or under 500 kilometers? And I'm curious what everyone's answers are. They'll probably just reaffirm what I already know, but it's essentially that people don't really move away from their homes, whether they have money or they don't. It's only under very extreme circumstances that people emigrate away from where they were born. Home is where the heart is. It's very hard to move across the country, no matter how socially or economically mobile you are. It's just not a thing that you do. You want to stay close to your family. And so, with this crisis of all these men, I think it maybe explains a little bit why we have a lot of immigration here in Canada from China. You have a lot of men who just don't have the prospects there. No women, no jobs. Come to Canada and you find those things. They're created here. It's pretty troubling. Another part of this, which is kind of interesting, is looking at the economic issues that are facing China right now. So, you have this more demographic thing that I think will be a bit of a slow boil, will take a little while to kind of permeate and see the ramifications of. But you have things like now Chinese factory activity slowing, adding to economic strain. So monthly purchasing index issued by the National Statistics Agency and an industry group retreated 48.4% from April's 49.2 on a 100-point scale. Numbers below 50 show activity declining. So this big idea of the China reopening not really taking hold. And I guess the question is like, where is all this activity going? Because the U.S. consumer is still strong. The China consumer is not as strong, but in terms of producers, they are moving to other places like Vietnam and India. India's stock market seeing a boom, their economy growing quite rapidly, same with their population growth. Chinese consumer spending kind of quick perk up after all the activity has around, the restrictions was released, but the recovery has been weaker than expected overall in the country. In addition to this, something that really shocked me, I didn't know about this, is China's national debt has actually grown 3 times as fast as the US's in the last 12 months. So second to the US, China as a country has the highest national debt. A big part of this is some people know that they have a massive allocation into real estate, very similar to what we have going on in Canada. A big percentage of Chinese net worth for the individual or the family there is in real estate, more than the stock market or anything like that. And so what do? The real estate is the easiest way to get a 5x leverage loan on your portfolio of assets or your job, and you buy up real estate. And so essentially, looking at this chart, this is a 1 year between April 2022 to April 2023. The dark blue is the national debt in 22, and then the lighter blue is 23. So the US has added about $1.5 trillion, a growth of about 4% in about a year. China's national debt has grown by 36% in 1 year. So a massive, massive expansion of debt growing there. And so, yeah, it's just a little worrisome for China. You know, they have been a big part of the reason that economic growth has, really helped out the US stock market large in part. So, not only do they, does China provide really cheap goods for the West, but they have now become kind of enriched from their improving economy and demographics. And so they've been going out purchasing Apple products, record box office sales, all that. And the Chinese consumer is slowing, and they are getting ridden with debt at a much faster rate than the US. And so it's just something to keep an eye on, to think about as kind of like a global picture. I like to look, on some of these things. And yeah, over the next few shows, I'll try and bring a few more stats to kind of illustrate the picture of what they're going through. But yeah, pretty interesting. So all that being said, I want to talk later at the end of the show about how Bitcoin could play into this, especially in the idea of social mobility and leaving your country for other opportunities. Before we dive into that, a quick word from our sponsor as to do with Bitcoin. Beaver Bitcoin, easiest way to dollar cost average right from your bank account in Canada. No need to do lengthy signups and all these complicated things with exchanges. Straight from your bank account in your Bitcoin wallet. Take a look and give them a look and sign up. This week's show is brought to you by Beaver Bitcoin. Dollar cost averaging is the most stress-free method to enter the Bitcoin space. And if you're looking for a simplified way of buying Bitcoin in Canada without needing to rely on a custodial exchange, Beaver Bitcoin is your best bet. Beaver Bitcoin lets you set up recurring Bitcoin purchases directly from your Canadian bank account and straight into a Bitcoin address that you control. It's like a savings account in a currency that you actually want, or a Netflix subscription that doesn't suck. And if you don't want to wait to stack sats, Beaver Bitcoin supports instant non-custodial Bitcoin buying via e-transfer as well. Give it a shot today at beaverbitcoin.com. Alrighty. Baptpeak, I don't know how to say your name, I'm sorry. In the chat asked me what my asset allocation was. That's a really good question. Funny enough, before getting on the show yesterday night, I was thinking how much money I put into my off-grid property, and it's like way more than I thought. And so now when I look at the breakdown of all my assets, now when I look at a breakdown of all my assets, I realize that real estate is a much bigger part of my net worth than I thought. So I don't know my asset allocation. I would say that it is Bitcoin first, real estate close second, and then cash, my own production business, stuff like that, a pretty distant third, fourth, fifth sort of thing. So yeah, what does that say about me? It says that I didn't buy enough Apple or Nvidia stock at the lows and flip that. So we'll see. There's lots of opportunities. I definitely keep more cash in my portfolio than most people, and it's not great when there's like 8, 10, 15% inflation. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents. All right, let's talk about quickie news. So first one, which is really cool. So Satoshi is being immortalized as an AI. So Pierre Corbin, another fantastic Bitcoin filmmaker in the space, actually, has taken all of Satoshi's forum posts and then some excerpts from the Bitcoin Standard, a couple of these big Bitcoin books, and kind of input them into the open source ChatGPT model. And now they have a thing called Talk to Satoshi. So you can ask, Bitcoin GPT questions about, debt and things like that, and it'll try and give you a good answer from the perspective of maybe what Satoshi would be like, or an Austrian economist at large. So that's pretty cool. It's one of these neat things that you can do with AI is you can kind of shape the brain of like certain clients. And I think there's going to be a lot of use for these more customized AIs rather than just like plain old ChatGPT. I used to think we just have one big hive mind, but I think it's very important that we have AIs with differing social and political opinions and not just ones that are either woke or try and give like a very unbiased view about everything. So yeah, it'll be really interesting, and eventually these things will debate each other. I mean, you can already get ChatGPT to debate itself, but it'd be cool to see some of these AIs debate each other in the future. You know what? Thinking about this, that would be a really cool competitive thing. Would be you have like a day or 2 days to train an AI to do something, and then everyone puts their AIs in this competition, and there are judges to see, which one is the most eloquent, which one presented the best argument, things like that. And it kind of reflects how good your training and programming of the AI is, right? At the end of the day, these things are all just tools, but I just came up with something. That would be cool, man. AI debates, AI battles, much better than watching the presidential debates. They would have some substance, right? And they would actually stay on time too. You could say only 60 seconds. You can't break that. The AI wouldn't break it. All right, some positive news. So you might remember a couple of weeks ago, the White House proposed putting this 30% energy tax on Bitcoin mining in the US, citing that, it consumed too much energy, all this stuff. It was a proposal. It wasn't a real thing. Well, in the whole US debt ceiling deal, it was nixed. So crypto miners, Bitcoin miners, they managed to get away with this for another year, which is great. Obviously, the bureaucrats and the powers that be are going to still try and kill Bitcoin mining however they can in the US. But it's nice to see that there is a constituency in the US that is looking out for these issues and making sure that really like industry killing bills that come out of a place of complete misinformation and misunderstanding are not getting passed. So while the debt keeps on rising and the fiat keeps on debasing, there are some people there, in the halls of Congress that actually understand that Bitcoin is good for national security. Hopefully we get that in Canada too at some point. Man, I could do a whole show on this topic, and WeWork is always such an interesting thing. They've made TV shows and all this stuff on it. But little do some of us know that WeWork actually is a public company now. So it launched as a SPAC like a year or two ago. It isn't just some like private crazy story of boom and bust. Like this is a company that you can own shares in. Why would you is another question that I can't answer. But some of the big things that have happened in the last 2 weeks have been 2 top executives have left. The bonds that WeWork have, their financing, is trading at 40 cents on the dollar, which means the market thinks it's more likely that they default on their money than it being worth anything. The stock is down 99% from its peak valuation. So peak valuation, this company was worth like $48 billion, and it's worth less than $1 billion now. It IPO'd at $11.78, and what is it, 17 cents per share? I mean, that is incredible. WeWork stock. Jesus, 18% or 18 cents. It's up 10% today, though, so there's something, right? I mean, that is an abysmal chart. Does not get much worse than that. And so we could go into all the reasons why this is happening, but I think it's pretty obvious. This whole model of work from home definitely killed them. Why bother having these offices? They're, super heavily invested in commercial real estate, which is losing money. Like they are selling office buildings for below what they paid for them in like 2012 in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco and stuff now. And so commercial real estate, which is, a big part of their book, is just declining like crazy. And these spaces, they're just rotten loans, rotten everything on their balance sheet. So my prediction is, and we'll see, if somebody wants to take the ante on this, the opposite side of this, my prediction is WeWork will file for a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 11 bankruptcy within 365 days. I don't think they make it through another year. I could up it and say they won't even make it to the end of the year. But commercial real estate, we all know, is in for a reckoning. These guys are over leveraged to crazy on it, and it's not looking good. That company's already basically worth zero. Just a matter of time until the hammer drops and all shareholders are wiped out, in my opinion. If anyone in the chat wants to take the other side of this bet, I will bet $10 worth in Bitcoin that this company does not exist in 365 days. How about we call it like 50,000 sats or something like that? So who knows what that'll be worth. So 50,000 sats, if you think WeWork's going to be here in more than 365 days without a bankruptcy, let me know. I like making bets, I guess. This is why I'm broke. All right, some positive news in the Bitcoin space. So on top of mining not having this crazy tax on it in the US, the amount of carbon emissions from Bitcoin mining electrical usage has been slashed in half in about 3 years. So now, for every kilowatt hour of electricity consumed by Bitcoin mining, it's gone down from 601 grams of carbon emissions to 299 grams. So no other industry in the world has become as emission efficient as Bitcoin has in such a short period of time. And that number is only going to decline, because in my opinion, I think almost all Bitcoin mining within the next 10 years is going to be moving to hydroelectric and renewable energy, but mostly hydroelectric. And then further on the chain, everything with Bitcoin mining is going to be mined through nuclear power plants, which between the two emit zero, big fat zero carbon emissions. So that's cool. Another cool thing, if you like to see the decline of banks, I guess, is U.S. bank deposits have seen their largest quarterly decline since data collection began in 1984. So people pulling their money out of banks, a little bit maybe out of fear, but mostly because these banks are still paying crappy rates. I can go buy bonds. I can go buy every stock on the S&P that seems to be going up. Why on earth am I keeping my money in a bank? And little known fact, when you keep your money in a brokerage, it is not being fractionally reserved lent out. And you also get the FDIC or whatever insurance, CDIC insurance. So not only are you protected federally, but it's not going to even be lent out to other people when it's sitting in a brokerage as well, from my understanding. So safer in a stock brokerage than a bank. Would you look at that? And then lastly, this one's kind of interesting. I think it should have been done a long time ago, but YouTube has reversed their misinformation policy to allow US election denialism. They realized that within 2 years and tens of thousands of video removals, that they shouldn't have this policy of banning any conversation around the 2020 election potentially being fraudulent. They made the calculation realizing that, what was it here? The company said in a statement, leaving the policy in place may have the effect of curtailing political speech without meaningfully reducing the risk of violence or other real-world harm. So, shouldn't have been done in the first place, but it is nice to know that not everything is a one-way street with censorship, that some of these companies can pull back on this. And if I were to take a guess, I would say that the rise of Rumble and these alternative video platforms is more of the reason they have peeled back the censorship at YouTube. YouTube has famously adapted to all of their competitors. So YouTube used to be this platform for really short videos, and then Netflix came out and dominated people's attention span. And you'll notice that, YouTube now isn't recommending much longer videos to people. You used to never see YouTube videos over 10 minutes, and now it's hard to find one that's under that isn't like a movie trailer or a music video. Now they're realizing that they're losing all these people to Rumble and these platforms that aren't censored. And I think they're going to, this will be the first of many things they roll back in terms of fully censoring content. So yeah, money dictates things, I guess, right? So yeah. All right. So last topic here, and I don't have a full segment on this, so we'll try and keep it short. We talked a lot about how in China, opportunity is elsewhere. And I think it's obvious more than ever. It's pretty brutal when you have that many men in your country relative to women. Like, if not finding a job wasn't a good of an impetus enough to leave your country, not being able to find a life partner, a love of your life, I mean, that is pretty bad. And it's only seemingly getting worse. So That doesn't even itself out over the course of a generation too. It's not like people can just focus on having more women. There was a deliberate decision for decades to have boys in families in China, and so unless they leave, they die, or everyone decides we're only going to have women, that problem is not getting fixed anytime soon. And China, historically has never allowed mass immigration, and you can't just only allow women into your country either. That's kind of weird. So yeah, they're going to have that problem for a long time. But besides the demographic issue, the opportunity issue is one that plagues a lot of Western countries. Can't find jobs in the US, or living expenses are too high. Now I can work remotely. Why live in the US? You have countries like El Salvador really opening up their borders to technology companies. Strike now has a headquarters there. You're seeing all these Latin American countries really realizing the rise of digital nomads and all these things. And one thing that I just don't find talked about enough is how important it is to have a form of money that supports that economic mobility that people are increasingly seeking in this world. So again, to kind of like pinpoint on our question, most people don't live more than 500 kilometers from where they were raised, and there's periods throughout history of mass immigration, usually through traumatic experiences and things like that. But more and more people from first world countries are moving to so-called third world countries. And so the question I have is, how are these people moving their capital and wealth to these countries, right? Because maybe they'll go and they'll live there for 2 or 3 months, but there is going to be an onset of people that say, I'm out of the US. I'm going to have a family and raise a family in countries like Costa Rica, El Salvador, Colombia, maybe Thailand, Bali. Like all these places are getting an influx of young people, and they're staying longer and longer times too. They're not just going in for like 2 or 3 months. And I really wonder, like, how do you move your capital? If you're going to just keep all your bank accounts in Canada but work down there, you're paying dual taxes. So that's not really that efficient. You have all these companies popping up. There's one called Plan B Passport, which reaches out to Bitcoiners to get passports and citizenships in other jurisdictions where, they could trade, they aren't taxed on their wealth, they could escape a wealth tax, for example. And I can't think of any other asset that supports that social mobility, that kind of, desire to relocate oneself than Bitcoin. And so, that's just in the context of rich people, number one. So rich people, it's easier for them to move assets than anyone, let's just say. But now when we think about mass emigration from some of these failing countries, and I think this is going to become the story of the next 20 years, is these countries that are just in massive debt spirals, the opportunity drying up, many in Africa, you see what's going on in Argentina. How do these people move their money out? And I can tell you, with an increased surveillance state, it's not going to be cash in briefcases. It's not going to be cash in duffel bags. You can't move real estate straight up. These people don't own stocks, and you couldn't really move those either. People are going to be buying Bitcoin, but I think bigger than Bitcoin right now, because I think Bitcoin is still very much in its infancy, I think people are going to increasingly move into stablecoins. And funny enough, even though stablecoins were created after Bitcoin, I think they have moved to a point of maturity and kind of realizing their fullest potential a lot sooner, and they will continue to kind of, I guess, reach their peak saturation quicker than Bitcoin will. And I know this is heresy when it comes to, Bitcoin maximalists and everyone in this space. I know that there is a lot of controversy around things like Tether and USDC, that these things are still heavily surveilled, they're not auditable and things like that. But they provide a real use case, and that is for anyone, anywhere in the world to have access to the US dollar in a kind of or nearly unfringible way, I guess, compared to the legacy system. So on that note, a really good example of this is that never before in a bear market, Tether's been around since like 2012, 2013, never before in a bear market has the Tether market cap hit a new all-time high. So we know that when crypto collapses, people just pull money out of the ecosystem, they redeem their Tethers for US dollars. A lot of that happened during the FTX debacle. But now capital is rushing back into USDT, and usually that correlates with a rise in Bitcoin. Hasn't quite really done that. And I think a big part of that is that people are using Tether, USDT, because they just need the US dollars. It's not just a gateway for them to speculate and buy crypto. It's a way for them to move their net worth in a relatively stable vehicle. And Argentina is like a massive adopter of USDT. So, whether or not you agree with the practice of using these stable coins, I think there is, they're not fully auditable. The thing that makes them, I think, a little bit more secure in the minds of people is that since they are backed by US Treasury notes, which are not going to default anytime soon, which are paying a tremendous amount of profit, we see that the stablecoin business is strong, and that lends, I guess, more confidence to people in holding them for longer durations of time, and people just ultimately putting their money in it to escape their sovereign fiat currencies that aren't digital, that aren't, really redeemable across borders. And so it's not talked about a lot. We talk a lot about these circular Bitcoin economies, and I think those are accelerating. I think they're going to be a big beneficiary of this move to mobility, to kind of going where the capital is welcome. This is a great image here from Blink, which makes one of the Bitcoin wallets, of basically the big bang of Bitcoin circular economy. So I was lucky enough to go to Bitcoin Lake. I've seen Bitcoin Beach. But last year, dozens of these places started up, dozens of little communities around the world. We're talking the Philippines, Kenya, Vietnam, Senegal, Portugal, Italy, Brazil. So many of these little towns saying, hey, let's get some people on Bitcoin here. And it kind of just spreading like wildfire. And I think Tether is going to be a part of these as well. Again, people are going to kill me for saying this, but it's a big part of moving money around, and it just offers more financial inclusion at the end. I think eventually something big happens with Tether. I'm sure that the FUD isn't over for them. I'm sure the story isn't hunky-dory forever, but it's like a cockroach. The longer it survives, the more durable it gets as a reputation, and the harder it ultimately becomes. And so now in this state of not 0% interest rates, all Tether has to do really is keep a balance of cash around and then just stick the other 50% of it into treasuries. And they've done that. And, at this point, they're even now buying Bitcoin with some of the profits. So, yeah, Tether, Bitcoin, all of these things are killer apps for mobility. And I don't see this talked about that much in the Bitcoin space. They are allowing people to move capital from really tight jurisdictions in poor countries in a way that has never been accessible to the general populace. And the people in rich countries now have a much more liquid vehicle than, taking cash in a briefcase or laundering money through gold or whatever to move money cross borders. And I think that is a killer use case for cryptocurrencies that is going to continue and really does justify whatever their market value is. And you can say, oh, but it's criminals doing this and, all that. It's like, yeah, great. But, when one of these falls, another will just emerge because they are, permissionless, they're borderless, all these attributes that kind of define the strength of a currency. People will naturally flock to keep their savings in it. And whether that is Tether and whether that is maybe a more volatile one like Bitcoin is another story. But I think as Bitcoin becomes bigger, it becomes less volatile, and it becomes appealing to people who aren't just looking for, the hardest money in the world as like an investment opportunity, but just a place to move wealth from one country to another without being bothered about it. So, yeah, that's it for the day. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll dive into some of the comments here, see what you guys had to say. Hope everyone's doing well today. Funny, I am going to be on another live show in a couple minutes. So if any of you watch BTC Sessions, he is going to be doing a live show in an hour, and I will be on that talking about why I'm bullish on Bitcoin. And it may or not have already been spoiled on this show. All right, Baptiste, happy Friday. I answered your question about asset allocation. I DCA'd all the way down. Bad market timing, just happened to have more liquidity the last year or so. Man, one of the big lessons that I learned, and I guess like expose my current financial state. I haven't really been working and earning income that much in the last few months, honestly. Like, it's been a lot of YouTube, working on these bigger videos. I just haven't been as productive as I guess I normally am. And I've been in a bit of a rut sometimes. Like, I'll just admit that. Like, I haven't been, I guess, full amped, super motivated to even work on my passion projects. I've just been, just trying to figure out what I really want to do. And I think the main goal is I want to do YouTube, but it's come at the expense of actually making income at my actual, profit generating business. And so this year, less 2022, but more 2023 has been not great for making money. But I think the real way to like not care about investments is to just have steady income. And I know that sounds cliche, like, oh, just make money and then, just passively invest. But that is, to me, what keeps me unemotional about the market. That's what keeps me from trying to time the market. If I am not having any income whatsoever, then timing the market is so much more important than if I do have like a steady income stream. So that's one of the goals for the next year, is like try and diversify income streams, I guess. Try and make YouTube profitable. But yeah, it's been a learning lesson that you can't just live off of your Bitcoin savings forever. I've certainly gone a long ways on them, but yeah, gonna try and make some money off of YouTube at some point. Got a great video coming with BJ. I don't know if he's still in the chat here, but yeah, that's coming down the line, and I think it'll be cool reaching out to some more people that are not just Bitcoiners with that. So the way you remember blue collar is manual labor gets you more dirty. You can't wear a white collar. I like that. I'm not going to forget that one now. That's a great one, Baptiste. Makiko, timing the market is everything, but it's too hard to predict too. Yeah, and it's always, I almost think that if you make the most wild, outlandish prediction, it's more bound to come true than if you just look at what's happening today and think it's going to happen a year from now. So again, like a year ago, if you told me that Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft, all the FANG stocks, all going to be at all-time highs within a year, don't even worry about it, just buy every dip, I would have been like, really? Like, interest rates are going to keep going up. And I probably said something to that extent this time last year. And guess what? They all blew everyone's expectations away. Everyone said this is going to be a bad year for stocks, higher rates, all that. Doesn't matter. Always laugh at Beaver Bitcoin for buying Bitcoin in Canada. Beaver Bitcoin buying Bitcoin in Canada. Yep. To be fair, you day trade, so you need to have cash on hand too. That's true. I do have a long-term investment portfolio in some really not well-performing companies, including TAT. But yeah, I do have FANG as well. The one thing that I have in my portfolio that isn't like unusual is probably Tesla. Like, I have that one now, and I'm probably never going to sell it. I just think, man, what you see what they're doing, you can't help but think like they're just going to be around forever. And so I guess the simple way of investing sometimes is just thinking, what company has proven that they've already been able to, endure recessions and things like that, and what ones are going to continue to do that for the next 20, 30 years. So yeah, pretty simple. Have you just called the top on Nvidia? No, I haven't, but I'll tell you what I think of Nvidia. I think that it's obviously overvalued, but I think that they're going to continue to grow, and I think it's hard to estimate where they're going to go. But I think eventually what you will see, and Chamath Palihapitiya said this on the All In podcast, is that right now people are going into the hardware plays. They're going to the brick and mortar sort of, physical realities of the AI space. Eventually, I don't think that will be as sexy, and I think people will overshoot how valuable that is compared to software. And money will come out. It'll rotate out of Nvidia as an AI play and move more into software solutions for AI, which I think will ultimately still have better margins. You still got to think that these semiconductors, as great as they are, as in demand as they are, they're not that profitable. They're not huge profit engines. They're not taking advantage of the cost efficiencies that are created with AI and the software involved in that. So they're creating, tools, AI tools in NVIDIA, but ultimately, if you're investing in NVIDIA, you're investing in the future of data centers growing exponentially, which they will. But I just think that, the market will chase the fastest horse on this, and we haven't even begun to see the AI boom that I think is about to come. You're going to see more of these SPACs and all these things coming out that are going to take advantage of AI. And it's just a matter of figuring out, what's legit and what's a scam. I think much like the internet bubble, crypto, and all this stuff, most of these AI plays are going to be way overhyped and scummy and scammy. You're going to see a lot of companies start saying, we're utilizing AI in this process to save money, and it's going to be a bunch of nonsense. But there's going to be some winners in there, and the question is going to be just to find where those are. And I think eventually the money will rotate out of the hardware plays into the software plays that have those opportunities. So yeah, 50,000 sats is worth more than WeWork. I agree. It will be very soon. So nobody wants to take that bet. I mean, it's not that much money. I mean, who knows where 50,000 sats are in a year, but let's just say Bitcoin is just flat for a whole year, which I would love. I'd love if I just don't have to care about the Bitcoin price. It's only $10. Someone will take me up on it. Someone in the comments, take me up on it. I'll even give like 2-to-1 odds on it, maybe. I don't know. I just I really think it's going to be gone. And yeah, well, it'll make the documentary series with Jared Leto on it that much more relevant, I guess. But yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to see me on BTC Sessions, just look up BTC Sessions on YouTube or Twitter. He'll post a link. I'll be there in an hour chatting more about Bitcoin and why I'm bullish on Bitcoin. And yeah, thanks so much everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to give the video a like. It gets it out to more people. I have some cool stuff coming up real soon. And yeah, can't wait to share with you. And then next week, I've been messing around with it. I'm trying to get chat messages to pop up while the show is going on, and I'm going to do more of a job to try and jump into the chat mid-show. I really appreciate you guys commenting because we'll try and integrate more of what you guys are talking about in the live show. And when that visually pops up, I think it'll make these streams a lot more fun to listen to, especially for the people who are watching after the fact, which is most of you. So yeah, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend, and I'll catch you next week. Take care.